Okay, go ahead.
This is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York, 27th of August, 2004, 1 p.m. The interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Yes, my name is Roy Conklin. I was born on January 16, 1930 in Monsey, New York, which is in Rockland County.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
I was a graduate of State University of New York at Cortland with a Bachelor of Science degree in education. I graduated in 1951.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted in my senior year, which was 1950-51. The Korean War had already begun in June of 50. I wanted to be part of the war, and I knew that eventually I'd be in it, so I volunteered for an OCS program, Officer Candidate School. So while I was at Cortland, I applied for OCS and was accepted. So upon graduation in June of 1951, I went to Fort Dix for basic training.
Okay. Why did you select the Army?
That's a good question. I just thought the Army is where it would be. I'm not a sailor. I don't particularly like to be on ships, and I never had a bent for flying, so I guess I want to be a ground pounder.
Okay. All right. Could you tell us about going into the OCS program? And
Yes. Being that I was accepted in OCS, we went through 16 weeks of basic training at Fort Dix. Most of us in that basic training company were college graduates with OCS in the future. After 16 weeks of basic training at Fort Dix, we were given 8 weeks of leadership school at Fort Dix. And then we each went to the branch of our choice, and I chose infantry. My father wasn't too happy about infantry. He said, you know, there's a lot of branches, why'd you choose infantry? And I said, well, if I'm going to be in the Army, I might as well be in the infantry. So I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and we had 6 months of OCS training at Fort Benning. I graduated in May of 1952, as a second lieutenant. Upon graduation, my assignment, lo and behold, was Fort Dix, leading basic trainees through their program. So as a second lieutenant, I really went back and took 16 more weeks of basic training, because the second lieutenant in a basic training program pretty much was with the troops all day long. So come about November of 1952, I volunteered for Far Eastern Command. And I did get assignment to go to the Far East. On my journey to the Far East, I was at Fort Lewis in Washington, and they froze all infantry officers for training purposes. I wasn't too happy with that, and another lieutenant and I went to the Inspector General, which probably was a big mistake as far as career design, and we wanted to be shipped overseas. So within a matter of hours, I was on a plane, and the plane took us through Canada, Alaska, the Aleutian Islands, and landed in Tokyo. So within a matter of hours, I was in the Far Eastern Command. At Tokyo, we went to Camp Drake, which was kind of a reception center in Far Eastern Command. I was at Camp Drake about a week when I received orders to move to Korea. And as an infantry officer, I boarded a ship at Yokohama and sailed around through the Red Sea and the Chinese Yellow Sea into Incheon. Now I came into Incheon December of '52. I wasn't there when Incheon was taken by the Marines, probably back in '50. When I arrived at Incheon as an officer, second lieutenant officer, I was made a train commander. And that meant I was on the docks greeting the troops as they came off and putting them upon the train that I was assigned to. And that train went up into Yangdong-po, I remember, and eventually Chuncheon. And Chuncheon was a repo depot, replacement depot. And being a replacement officer, I had no idea where I'd end up or where I'd be. So at the repo depot, they assigned each of us a division to report to. Some went to the 2nd, some went to the 7th, some went to the 3rd. I went to the 40th Division, which was the California National Guard. the Guard had already rotated home by that time, so it was really a regular Army division at that time. So my first assignment in Korea was a second lieutenant platoon leader in the 1st Battalion, 223rd Infantry Regiment, 40th Infantry Division. And my arrival in Korea was at a repo depot to get on a back of a 2.5-ton truck and go to the division of assignment. It was 40 degrees below zero at that time. I remember that very vividly. Sitting in the back of a 2.5-ton truck, climbing the mountains of Korea to go to the division I was assigned to. And upon arrival to the division headquarters and then being processed, I ended up with my company. My company was A Company, Able Company at the time. And the first thing, within a matter of days when I was there, the regimental commander came down to greet the new officers. And I was one. There was another officer who followed me about 2 weeks later. And he was outside of my bunker, and a mortar shell hit and killed him. So 2 days in combat, I lost my regimental commander, and it got a little scary then. I said, you know, here I am up in the mountains of Korea, and I didn't know what to expect at all. Well, that winter, 52, and then back into the spring of 53, we were in trenches. At that time in Korea, 1952 and mostly in 53 was the trenches and bunker war. And maybe this is why they call it the Forgotten War, because all the activity that happened previously, where the troops went to the Yalu and back to Seoul and back to Busan and back to Seoul again, all that was over when I was there. We were static, very static. So as a platoon...
Now, can I go back a second?
Yeah, sure.
What was your equipment like? How would you rate your winter equipment?
Well, the winter before, and the winter before that, they had leather boots. And a lot of people got frostbite in Korea. When I got there, they issued what they call Mickey Mouse boots, which were big rubber insulated boots, which were excellent because you could get water in them and your feet would still stay okay.
Were those white rubber boots?
No, they were black.
Black, okay.
And of course we had long underwear. We had a field uniform, which at that time was wool. And then we had a parka. And Korea, if you know Korea, they did wear parkas like the Marines did too. And pile caps. That's unique to Korea, pile cap. Your helmet went over the pile cap. And you were pretty much bundled up. You had a trigger finger in your glove, and you practically stood there, you know, saying, okay, now keep warm. Going to the bathroom was quite difficult, as you might imagine, without latrines and things of that sort. So yeah, the dress and the equipment was much different, I think, in Korea than if you continue on to the Vietnam experience and so forth. So my platoon and my company and my division was on Heartbreak Ridge when I got there. But as soon as I got there, the division was pulled off of Heartbreak, and we moved over to Punchbowl. The Punchbowl was like the name sounds. It was like a big punch bowl with a huge rim around it. And the Punchbowl was taken about a year before that by the 2nd Division. And we went into trenches. We relieved a South Korean division and went into their trenches and took up a defensive position in the Punchbowl. We were in a Punchbowl for about 3 months. And then we were pulled off and moved to a rest area, which really wasn't a rest area, it was just a place behind the lines. And then back up to the Punchbowl again. And in late June, early July, and now I'm leading up toward the end of the war. A lot of talk about Parmesan, a lot of talk about prisoner exchange, and everybody was saying, well, the war is coming to an end. The last 3 or 4 months of the Korean War, my experience was, there was an awful lot of activity because the Chinese and the North Koreans were trying to take the high ground so that when the ceasefire went into effect, they had a very good defensive position along the so-called DMZ and later on the MLR. A lot of activity. My job as a platoon leader, not only to place my platoon in defensive position, but we had to take out patrols every night. And every officer rotated. So every 3rd night, you had a patrol that you had to take out into the so-called no man's land. Our trenches and the Chinese trenches and North Korean trenches were visible. They were that close. In mileage, it might have been a mile, but on a straight line, you could see trench to trench. You had 3 patrols. We had a recon patrol, where you went out and did reconnaissance and tried to find out if there was any activity, anything in the area that might be of interest to the intelligence people. You had an ambush patrol, where you tried to catch an enemy prisoner. And then you had a contact patrol, where you had to make contact with the enemy. So those 3 patrols were assigned to second lieutenant, first lieutenant, platoon leaders. And I can't tell you how many patrols I was on, but there were quite a few. And it was very interesting in the beginning because when you take out a patrol of 6, 8, 9 men, you really don't know in the middle of the night, because we always took a patrol out about 9 o'clock at night, came back by 4 or 5 in the morning. You really didn't know the terrain that well, you know. So in the beginning, all the patrols used to run out comma wire with W8 telephone. So when I was there, it was just one big black group of wires, which I followed out and followed back. There was nothing exciting about that. But then I started using a compass, and I would take an azimuth before I left the trench and take a back azimuth so I knew I was coming back in the right direction. Well, it wasn't that easy because it was so steep. The mountains were very steep, so when you took patrol into the valley, you lost all perspective of, you know, where the other trenches were. And if you were on a contact patrol, you actually started up the hills on the other side where the North Koreans and the Chinese were. And if you drew fire, that's about all you wanted to do. And then you would mark position and come back. If you were on an ambush patrol, you would lay an ambush, maybe 400, 500, 600 yards out in no man's land, and then hope that a Chinese or North Korean patrol would come into your area and then try to throw a grenade, concussion grenade, into that group of people and to try to get yourself a prisoner. And a recon patrol obviously was to find things. And I had experience in all 3.
Now, did the same number of men go out in each one of these, or?
I would say it averaged about an officer and a sergeant and about 6 or 7 enlisted men. And we took out patrols at night, as I mentioned. However, in June, when the weather got a little better, I asked the battalion commander, Colonel Spillman, if I could take out a daylight patrol. And he said, there's no way we're going to send anybody out in the daylight, you know. And I said, but we don't know the terrain. We really are groping around at night trying to find trails and paths and so forth. And they were mined. A lot of them were mined and booby trapped. So Major McDonough, who was the S3, both of them West Point graduates, talked to me. He said, I'll tell you what, I'd like to have you go out there, and I'm going to put a cap over your head, which is a combat air patrol. Whatever the craft was, I don't know. And he said, I want you to take a PRC-10, which is the backpack radio, keep in touch with the plane, and in the daylight, you can spot him and he can spot you. And we did. We went out in the daylight, and we left at 5 o'clock in the morning and worked our way to get to our barbed wire, because we had barbed wire in front of our trenches and mines. We had a patrol gate, and you worked your way through it. Daylight was a heck of a lot better because I could see, you know, where I was going, and I had a good eyesight and a line of sight on the Chinese and the North Korean trenches. Oh, after about 2 or 3 hours of working our way down into the valley, very carefully keeping cover and concealment, I saw a bunch of enemy activity up ahead. Patrols, we generally laid out prefixed artillery fire by number. You call in a number and you say fire number 6, fire number 7, based on the azimuth that was set up. So I decided to call in a mission and talked to the plane upstairs. And I said, I have a fire mission. I said, I'm going to give you the coordinates, but it's basically artillery position number 6, but the coordinates, I read off the coordinates from the map. And he said, okay, wait 1. And about 2 or 3 minutes I heard this tremendous noise. It sounded like a railroad car. Boom! And the mountain disintegrated. And another one came in. Boom! And I called out, what are we doing? He says, you're firing from the Big Mo, 16 inches.
Oh my God.
Now I'm a little lieutenant with a backpack radio calling for a fire mission with the Missouri sitting 12 miles off the coast. That was quite an experience. and I'll tell you later on, I visited Missouri when I went to Pearl Harbor. So that patrol was really, that was the interesting. Then we came back with the intelligence we found. I found a bridge, I found a footpath, I found where the Chinese were coming over at night for their patrols, and that all went back to report. Another patrol, and I don't want to get into every patrol, but I think these are the interesting ones. It was a long patrol. In Vietnam, they have it called LRPS, Long Range Patrol. We didn't have anything like that in Korea, but we had donut rolls, which were roughly a half a mile to a quarter of a mile as you went out. And I had a 4 donut roll mission. So what he did, McDonough, S3, he sent out 2 patrols ahead of me to set up blocking positions and fire base positions. And one patrol went out and set up a fire base for me. Another patrol went through him and set up another fire base because we're way out. And in my patrol, went through the first, went through the second, went through the third. It's now about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm pretty well way out there. And like a John Wayne movie, I hear, GI, GI. And I turned around, I pulled the pin on a grenade, and 3 Chinese came out of the bushes with their hands up, with their burp guns and everything else. And I got a live grenade in my hand. And I got 3 prisoners, and it's pitch black. And we always took a Rok with us, a Republic of Korean soldier, who could speak the language. And we were in an indigenous country because the North and South Koreans looked alike and they spoke alike too. So he's talking to them. In the meantime, I got a grenade, and I didn't want to release the spoon, you know. So I took a piece of the comma wire, we cut that off, and I tried to thread it through as best I could. And then I took it and I laid it down with the spoon down on the ground, and then dropped it, walked away, and thank God it was enough weight to keep the spoon down. So now I got the 3 Chinamen, and I'm way the hell out. And I called back and I said, I just picked up 3 prisoners. I want to come back, and there's no complete your mission. Take them with you. So I suspected something was wrong, the fact that they gave themselves up. And as I moved forward, I heard an awful lot of activity. I heard foreign voices, Oriental voices. I heard a lot of clatter. And I said, you know what? I think I'm being ambushed. I think that's what they're doing. So I stopped my patrol, set up a perimeter defense, called back in again. I said, I want you to fire some artillery for me. I'm getting out of here. So as soon as we started firing artillery, all hell broke loose. There was a bunch of Chinese, either Chinese or North Korean, I don't remember at that particular time, came after us. But we managed to pull out. Now, by pulling out, that second line gave me a base of fire so that we had some fire and coverage, and they were firing artillery and mortars too. And then I got to the first line of defense, and they're gone. Lieutenant Sherry, I'll never forget his name. I don't know if I want to use names on television. And I had no base of fire, so we managed to scramble back to the trenches after a few hours.
So he just left his position?
Yeah. So we stopped at the intelligence bunker to get debriefed. And I saw him sitting there with a cup of coffee, and I almost went crazy. I said, you know, you left me out there with my patrol. He said, you know, I heard all that firing, I heard all that shooting. I figured you guys had it, so I bucked out. So he was replaced the next day.
Now, did you take the 3 Chinese with you?
Yeah, I brought them back. Now, they had a thing in Korea. If you picked up a prisoner, you got an R&R, rest reduction. Well, when I asked my R&R, I said, no, they gave themselves up. It doesn't count. I never got an R&R, and I was in combat for 8 months. Never got an R&R. That's another story too. So that's one of the night patrols, deep patrol, and I have had a lot of experience with patrols. One time, am I rambling on too much?
No, not at all.
We got sniped at every day because we're so close, and our trenches were about 6 foot deep, and we had firing positions in them. And during the day, if you walk the trenches, as I did checking my positions, you would hear a crack, boom, and you know when a bullet goes over your head, it goes crack, and then you hear thump. Well, we were taught in OCS, between the crack and the thump is where how far out they were, you know. And that never really worked. That formula didn't work so good. But my radio man, a young man by the name of Sullivan, he said, I thought I saw the muzzle flash. So I said, well, show me where you saw it. So the firing positions with sandbags were only about that wide. And he's here, and I'm here, and we're chest to chest looking through this little hole. And now I heard, not a crack, I heard a splash, and all sand flew, He went down, I went down, his arm hit. And I looked over and he got it right through the shoulder. So we're chest to chest and hit him here, 51 caliber. What they do, they used to take their 51s and strap them to a tree and zero them in on an aperture. And when they saw somebody looking out, they just squeezed the trigger. So that 51 hit him in the arm. And he got knocked down, I got knocked down, and both of us thought we were hit, but he was hit. So I gave him a shot of morphine and called in for a helicopter. And instantly, helicopters were first used in Korea as evacuation mostly, as you know, MASH hospital. And they took him away, and 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a letter from him. He was in Japan, and he was okay. It didn't hit any major organs, so he went home. So now the battalion commander says, okay, since you spotted his position, what I want you to do now, I want you to take a patrol out tonight, get in that position, and wait for him to come back in tomorrow. So I took patrol out. We found his spider holes. There was 3 or 4 spider holes because he could fire in every direction. And I put my patrol in position at night, and it's pouring rain all night long, rain like hell. In Korea, we really just wore ponchos. And I never wore a poncho on patrol, and I'll tell you another story about the memorial down in Washington. So come morning, we're in a position for all night long, wet, cold, hungry. We heard some people, and we looked down, and there were 2 Chinese, this time it was Chinese, coming into position. But one of my guys squeezed off a round, and they spooked him. So I called in, and I said, the snipers spotted us, and they took off. They said, okay, stay there. We're going to send another patrol out to relieve you. A patrol came out. Again, you had to wait for nighttime. Brand new second lieutenant, I never met him. He just got assigned to the company. And I said to him, look, you're going to be in position, but you're going to be here during the daylight. Don't move. Just dig in, stay here till nighttime, and then when he comes tomorrow. I went back to the bunker, went back to the trenches with my patrol, and I would say about 7 or 8 hours later, I got a call from the company commander. He said, the lieutenant that replaced you was just shot in the leg by our guys with a 50 caliber because they saw people moving around at daytime. They didn't know way out there who it was. So that guy lasted in Korea maybe 2 days, as far, but he had a good wound. So that was another kind of patrol. And well, anyhow, this all leads up to, for instance, one time I took a recon patrol and I saw an awful lot of things that weren't there before. There were caves dug in front of our trenches with food in it, ammunition in it, blankets in it, and I said, I think they're building up for a big push here. So intelligence said that there was a Chinese division that was approaching our position. And this is getting toward the end now. This is like in early July. And we may be under attack. And we were very careful about what was happening. So we kept watching. And sure enough, one night, very quickly, soon after I saw the stuff, they came. And they came and they came. You heard the whole story about the bugles and everything else. And I jumped into the forward observer's booth in my platoon, and I said to him, fire some rounds. So he started firing. I said, drop 200, because they kept coming in. Well, we had a couple, when you're in the trenches, you had what they call outposts, where you had dugout posts, and then out beyond that were listening posts. Those guys out there were just swept right over. And the Chinese just ran right through them, and they couldn't get back to the MLR. And we fired all night long. That's the time we fired 8,000 rounds. We fired everything we had. And they actually came into our trenches, but we were in bunkers, and they would run over the top of the bunkers and shoot down at us. So the next morning, we had done enough damage that they didn't continue to attack. And they were laying all over the place. So they started cleaning up the bodies, both the Chinese and ours. And the battalion commander came up, Spillman, and he said, I'm looking out in front of your position, out a ways, and I see a bunch of bodies. And it looks like a command group because they were together and they kind of opened up like a flower, He said, I'd like you to get down and bring back a couple of those bodies. So I got 2 or 3, I think I took 6 with me. Daylight now. And we went out over the trenches, worked our way down to the barbed wire. And when we got to the bodies, I said to the men, don't go near them because they might be booby-trapped. They always booby-trap their bodies. And I went over and I pulled a couple and they rolled over. And I noticed they were officers. They had epaulets on their shoulders. So after we checked 2 or 3 bodies, I called the men forward and we carried the body back to the trenches. And we were under fire now because they could see us out there. There were mortar fires and everything else coming in. But we managed to get back with 3 bodies. And through intelligence, it turns out they were Manchurians. And the Manchurians had trained for months on a hill that was similar to ours. So they had Bangalore torpedoes, and they had follow-up food, they had follow-up ammunition, they had all. So there were quite a few of them that really hit us. And that was probably the biggest attack we were under at that time. So anyhow, all of this happened. And this is the role of a lieutenant, infantry, platoon leader. I became executive officer of the company after that. And I still took patrols out because we only had 3 officers for the company. We were very short-handed. So we get orders early July, middle July, that we're going to move to Heartbreak Ridge and relieve the 45th Division. And Heartbreak Ridge was to our west. Punchbowl and Heartbreak were pretty close, and you probably heard of Old Balding, you heard of Pork Chop. They were all in that general vicinity. And if you saw the movie Pork Chop Hill with Gregory Peck, that was probably the closest thing I've ever seen. That was most realistic to our experience anyhow. So the big move was to be made, and under secrecy, we took off all insignia. They painted over the bumpers of all the vehicles. There was no indication the 40th Division was moving. So at night, we moved up man for man, platoon, platoon, company, company, equipment by equipment. What we did, we left the equipment in place, machine guns in place and so forth, and just pulled back and took theirs. Well, after this night move, and I was the first one up because I was the executive officer and worked with the company we were going to replace on Heartbreak Ridge. And we moved our people in, took over their positions. He gave me a briefing and so forth. The next morning, there's a big sign on the Chinese trenches. Now we're close. It says, "Welcome 40th Division." Now, all the secrecy and all that goes on. Then they read off our names from a roster. Lieutenant Conklin, Sergeant Warwick, and you know, that gets pretty scary when you hear them calling your name. Yeah. So now we're on Heartbreak Ridge, and went on for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and the truce was now getting closer and closer. And I now became a company commander. I was a company commander of A Company, and a battalion commander, Colonel Spillman again, called all his company commanders back to where he was on Bloody Ridge. We were on Heartbreak, he was on Bloody, which was behind us. And he wanted to tell us where we're going to go on the ceasefire and where to pull off and all that kind of stuff. So from my bunker to his hill was exposed. And my Jeep driver, Abernathy was his name, and I would go back with the Jeep, and he would go as fast as he could, and the mortar would go boom, 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 because they could walk the mortars on the road. And we get up to battalion headquarters, and Colonel Spillman says, the truce looks like it's going to be signed, and it's going to be 10 o'clock on July 27th, which was the next night. So he said, I want you to go back and brief all your people. This is not the end of the war. It's not an armistice. It's a ceasefire. So no fraternizing with the enemy, none of this stuff, you know. So I go back. And then he calls the company commanders again, and he says, I want to show you the position you're going to go into after you pull off the MLR. So back again, and that ride was not a pleasant ride. And then we got up to battalion, and he took us down into the valley behind us, and he said, okay, your company's going to go here, your company's going to go there. So I'm out with him and Major McDonough, and I look down and I see 3 prongs, which are bouncing Betty mines. The whole field was mine, and we're right in the middle of a minefield. So I said to him, you better stay where you are, and I kind of worked my way back in, and the engineers came and they marked them for it. Then we started getting artillery in the valley, and there were 2 tanks out there, so we ran and jumped under the tanks, and we could hear ping, 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 you know, all the shrapnel, and I felt like my feet were sticking out, so I kept pulling in, you know. And then, of course, the firing stopped. Back to the company, and now Abernathy turns the Jeep around. Heartbreak Ridge was a razorback ridge, and he goes over the side, and he jumps out, and the Jeep goes boom, boom, boom down into the valley. And then we're sitting there, and the next day, July 27th, after briefing all the squad leaders and everybody else that we're going to have a ceasefire at 10 o'clock at night, So if you sat there that last day, and the Chinese fired everything they had, they weren't going to take anything off the hill with them, you know. We were told you couldn't fire. You can only fire anti-suppressing fire. And we fired a little 60s. We fired up, you know, 80s, and maybe the 4.2 mortars and so forth. And it was a long, long day. And guys stayed in their bunkers. They didn't want to move, you know. And if you read my little story, you'll see we was trying to get inside your helmet, you know. And about 9:45, we got the word, have a turkey shoot. Fire everything you got. Now, infantry company, or platoon, is basically, you know, M1 rifles, light machine guns. We had a couple of heavies.
What did you carry?
I carried a carbine and a .45. I'll tell you about the carbine, too. So 9:45, we had a turkey shoot. Well, the Chinese had a turkey shoot, too, and it was like, in a way, it was bizarre. It was beautiful. It was just one solid band of traces going back and forth. Really. And then at 10 o'clock, ceasefire. Prior to that, though, I had a patrol. And in order to take a patrol from Heartbreak Ridge, you couldn't go very far because the Chinese trenches were so close. We would lower ourselves on a rope from the ridge line and work your way out to a little position we had dug in. And I said to them, you know, this is going to be a tough night. I drew contact that night, you know, of all nights to get contact patrol. I had a new second lieutenant, just joined me. His name was Thomas Cunningham, West Point. And he came to me about a week before and he said, look, I'm a regular Army officer, I'm a West Point graduate, I want to take that patrol. I said, Tom, I don't want to make contact. I want the guys to go out there and throw a couple of grenades and that's it, you know. And he said, no, I really want to take patrol. This is the night before the truce. And I called Colonel Spillman, who's a West Point graduate too, and he came up to the trenches. I said, look, I'm going to give him an order that I don't want to make contact, but to throw a couple of grenades and come back. And he said, well, I don't think we should make contact. It's getting too close to truce fire. So anyhow, he went out, and I said, stay on the W8, which is the telephone. And he met the patrol base, the outpost base. And he called in, he said, I'm going to move forward. And I said, don't move from where you are. The next thing I know, I didn't hear him again. And then he tried to pick me up on a PRC-6, the walkie-talkie. And that was the Chinese voices and everything. To that, they could really scramble that. And then about half an hour later, I heard brup, 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 the burp guns. And no Thomas Cunningham, no patrol. Never came back. So the next day, in the ceasefire business, now I'm leading back up to 10 o'clock at night, one of the guys out on patrol on the fire base went berserk. And they said he's frosting at the mouth and so forth and so on. And I just grabbed my helmet and my rifle and I jumped out and I grabbed another guy with me and we worked our way down a rope. We got out there and he was really in bad shape. So we carried him back to the trenches. As soon as I got back to the trenches, 10 o'clock at night now, no more. It was a ceasefire. And they got on the loudspeakers and they played Glenn Miller's In the Mood. Da 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 da. Then they called us again by name. Go home. You don't belong in Korea. We don't belong in Korea. The Chinese wanted out of there just as much as we did, you know. And that was it. 10 o'clock at night, July 27th, 1953, ceasefire. We pulled back to 2,000 yards the next day and dug in, defensive position. And after 8 months, I finally got an R&R. We're now in a blocking position. And I didn't get rest and recreation. They sent me to Air Ground Operations School, which is to work with the air controllers and so forth. So at least I had, you know, a little break. I was back in Japan, actually in Yokohama.
Did you ever find that patrol?
No. No, he's listed missing in action, but as I read the West Point yearbook, they've got him killed in action now.
All the men
It's been a long time.
in the patrol?
All the men in patrol, too. Every one of them. As a little follow about that, and I don't know where this is going to go, but I got a hold of Colonel Spillman afterwards. Another thing, when I came back from my 1 week, the CIC, the Combat Intelligence Corps, whatever that was, interviewed me. Why did I speak to the Chinese officer? Well, what happened is when they came over that next morning after ceasefire, they came into our trenches. They tried to come into our trenches. So I got out of my trench. And at barbed wire. And it was all littered with bodies, and because that Heartbreak Ridge was there for 2-3 years, it was a mess, you know. And we tried to communicate, and I said, patrol, night before. And he went, I said, what? Patrol. And he went, pop, 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 which meant a burp gun, you know. So anyhow, when I came back, I took pictures of this guy too. So I came back, they took my camera, they confiscated my camera. And they said, you're not supposed to talk to these people, you know, not supposed to fraternize. I said, I wasn't fraternizing, I was trying to find out my patrol, you know. So Spillman never backed me about my order about not going out. And this is one of the reasons I didn't stay in. I was going to go regular Army. They appointed me regular Army officer. Papers all filled out and everything. And I had that experience. I said, you know what? If you're not a West Pointer, you're in a different ball game here, you know. You're a reserve officer, which most of the reserve and the guard did the fighting in Korea, you know, as far as men on line. So anyhow, they didn't give me a reprimand because I just got the Silver Star from that action I told you about, and I had the Bronze Star and all that stuff. So they didn't give me a hard time. And they said, you still want to go regular Army? I said, no. I just as soon stay in a reserve program and go home.
Can I go back to the thing about ponchos? You said something about...
Okay. In, I guess it's 1995, they had the dedication of the Korean War Memorial. And they got a hold of my memoirs. And they took chapter 13, which is the last day of the war. There's nothing written about the last day of the war, okay? What was like being there? It's like, you know, in the armistice, November 11th of the, you know, First World War and so forth. So they took my article and they put it in their magazine. I gave it a copy of the magazine. The Korean War magazine opened up and had Heartbreak Ridge on the cover, which I took the picture of, you know. And I couldn't get there for the dedication. And my division wanted me to come and say a few words, you know, to our little group, you know. So on Labor Day, my wife and I went down right after that, and best time to go to Washington, because Washington's closed Labor Day. And you could ride around and go all the memorials. So I went to the Korean War Memorial. And I was quite impressed. You know, I think there's 17 7-foot figures in a V, and they introduced it as, or they said it was a contact patrol in Korea. So the Korean War veterans asked me to write my impressions of the memorial. I said, it's very moving. I really love the eyes and everything, but I said, I want to tell you something. We would never wear ponchos and steel helmets on a patrol. They're too cumbersome, they're too noisy. And I said, that really doesn't depict to me a infantry patrol. And they want to know all about what it was like and so forth. So I said, I want to tell you, if I wanted to call it anything, I would call it a forward patrol ahead of a division, moving out, you know, not a combat patrol.
Now, what did you wear if you didn't wear your helmet?
We wore soft cap.
Just a soft cap.
We wore fatigues. You took comma wire and you tied your pant legs in tight, you tied your sleeves in tight, you blackened your face, and you didn't wear a flak jacket either because it was too cumbersome. And Korea was so steep in those mountains, you know. So when we went on patrol, we were pretty much stripped down, and that memorial doesn't depict that. So it's been changed. It's, if you read anything about it now, it's not called a patrol. It's called a forward movement element, something like that. He asked me before about my carbine. The carbine is a good weapon, and you can put it on automatic too, but being new to Korea and being in a new combat position, and I was a platoon leader, they had a 30-round banana clip. Well, gung-ho is they had a banana clip going like this and 2 clips taped going down. And that looked really, you know, tough stuff, and I had a flash hider on it and everything else. Well, anyhow, going on patrol, we were coming back one morning, it was just about 4 or 5 o'clock, and a Chinese patrol was coming the other way because they had already made their recon. And I run right into the Chinese patrol. I took the safety off my carbine, and the magazine fell out. There's too much weight on it, you know? And now I'm standing there, and my sergeant behind me pushed me down and fired over my head, and he hit the Chinese officer. The Chinese officer landed up on top of me. So I'm scrambling around looking for my weapon, and looking for my magazine, and then the other patrols scattered. So at least I got the dead Chinaman there. So I took his hat and I took his burp gun, and they're in West Point Library right now. I donated them to the library. And when I came back, I felt like a fool. He said, threw that carbine away. I took an M1. That's my rifle from now on. Anyhow, so what happened is I did not stay in the Army. I did not make a career of it. And I was in pretty good shape because I had my combat experience. I did get my decorations, and I had a good write-up, and all my regimental commanders recommended me and all that kind of business. But I didn't like the good old boy society. I was trained to be an educator, so I began teaching.
Can I talk to you a little bit about how did you feel about the Rok Soldiers?
They were very good. Language was a barrier, obviously, but they were very trainable. Obviously, you can teach them how to shoot an M1, but they knew how to use the mortars. They were very good on patrolling with us because they were very stealthy, and they also knew the language and so forth. And they were pretty good soldiers. And Republic of Korea, we call them KATUSAs, Korean Army Training with the United States Army. The idea was they would train with us, then go back to a Korean unit. And that happened, but not too often. Most of the time they stayed with. I had a platoon, believe it or not. I had about 45 men. I must have had 14 KATUSAs. I had about 24 Puerto Ricans. I had some Mexicans, and I had some regular GIs. You know, and I say regular GIs because these were so different. You know, and it was quite a platoon to have because.
Did you have any blacks in your unit?
Yeah.
The Army, was it?
Yeah, I had some Abernathy, my chief tribe was black. What happened though, in the 3rd Division, they had a Puerto Rican regiment, and it was a Puerto Rican regiment training in Puerto Rico, but it was part of the 3rd Division. When they went to Korea, they took that regiment with them. They were in a defensive position on the MLR, and they were overrun by a big Chinese unit. And we had artillery called 555, the triple nickel, was set in the valley, and this Puerto Rican regiment was defending them. Well, they bugged out, and the 555 was overrun. All the equipment was gone. First time we ever lost our colors in battle. And they took the regiment, and they court-martialed the officers, and they broke up the regiment and sent them out to the other units. So that's how I ended up with 15 Puerto Rican, all with stripes, because they had, and I didn't care about stripes. If I liked you, you were my platoon leader. If I liked you, you were my squad leader, you know. And that was a pretty bad thing because they gave you that language, but no comprende, you know, that kind of stuff. But it was quite a mix for a platoon.
Now you were there after the relief of MacArthur.
Yeah.
Did you have any feelings about that at all?
Well, this was before I went to Army.
Yes, right.
And
But you were in the Army at the time.
yeah, and they were pushing through the Yallow, and I guess MacArthur felt that if he crossed the Yallow and took care of the so-called Chinese communists, that would be an end of the war over a long period of time. And MacArthur released him, and I guess in terms of his position as Commander-in-Chief, he felt that he didn't have the right to do certain things. And MacArthur was a very strong man.
Yes.
They used to call him the Emperor of Japan when I got there, you know. This is what he was. So anyhow, Ridgway came in then, and Eisenhower came over as president to visit. And what upset me personally, and I know everybody, a lot of you, we're in the trenches now. And this is getting toward the end. And one of our regiments was assigned to Kojido, which was a prisoner of war island.
Right.
And Sigmund Rhee saw the war coming to an end, and he wanted to extend the war. So he let the prisoners go. He repatriated all the prisoners. So now behind me, I've got thousands and thousands of North Koreans and Chinese being repatriated, and in front of me I got thousands and thousands trying to take our position. And it was a very demoralizing feeling. I said, what am I doing here? You know, we're defending the man's country, and he's letting all these people go because he wants to extend the war for many reasons. We were building roads, we were building schools, and so forth and so on. And then, of course, we did finally get the ceasefire. I mentioned to you that I went back 2 years ago. In 2001, the Korean government was celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Korean War. It started in 50, it ended in 53. And they invited veterans back as their guests for 5 days. And it was in a kind of a lottery system. And I was picked as one of the guys to go in October of 2001. Well, after 9/11, they canceled everything. Nobody's going to go on that trip. But I wanted to go. So I went on my own with my wife, who's now my wife. And we went to Korea. I had already been in contact with the mayor because I was the guest speaker of New York State Korean War Veterans here in Saratoga, and he was a guest of the mayor of Seoul. And he gave me his card. He said, when you come over, get a hold of me. So now I'm going back after 50 years, and I flew into Incheon. Before I came in a landing craft, now I'm flying in. Big airport now. Seoul is magnificent. I mean, they really built this city up. When I left, there was nothing. Just main gates were up, you know, the north, south, east. So my first experience was, ooh, you know, boy, I can't believe that they really did this in 50 years. And it's a very, very modern city, and they've done so much with it, you know. So while I was in Seoul, we stayed at an army base in Yangsan, and stayed in what they call an Army Recreation Center. It was a beautiful hotel. And from there, I took tours. Well, we went back to the DMZ, but you couldn't obviously go on the DMZ, but they had observation towers. The South Koreans pretty much had the observation towers. And the first thing in the observation tower, they said, okay, look across there, and there's a North Korean flag flying with the gold star and the red flag. And you're looking across, and ooh, you know, 50 years later, it's still 2,000 yards each way, you know, with tanks, artillery pieces, and soldiers on both sides. 160 miles long, a fence. So that was quite an experience to go. And then I went to Panmunjom, and Panmunjom is still there, and they still meet to talk about infractions of a ceasefire. So you go into Panmunjom now, and this side of the room where they had the negotiations, there's 2 South Korean soldiers standing there, and the other side of the room is 2 North Korean soldiers. So I'm looking at 2 North Korean soldiers now. And now you look over their side, and they've got a tower, and all the North Koreans there. And it was just a weird feeling to be looking at North Koreans again. Then there was called a Bridge of No Return that we went down to visit. When they repatriated the prisoners in 1953, you could cross that bridge, north or south. Like if you were a prisoner of the United States or the United Nations, you could come into South Korea. Or if you were an American prisoner, you can come into South Korea. But once you cross that bridge, there was no return. So it was a very interesting thing, because that bridge is still there. And they still have people who are being repatriated by crossing that bridge. So seeing that and seeing Korea was quite an experience for me. And then they had the Korean War Museum, which just opened up about 7 or 8 years ago. It's beautiful, right in where I was staying in Yangsan. And I toured the museum, and it was beautiful. It was a Korean War museum. And they had a Korean War section. And walked in there, and you could see certain units, but I see very little on the United States. And I said to the curator, I said, you know, I don't see too much about the United States. He said, this is a Korean War Museum. It's not a United States War Museum, you know. But it was good. So he took me in the back, and he gave me a beautiful color catalog of the whole museum. He said, I want you to take this, and I want to thank you for saving our country. Ooh, I saved this country, you know. But I heard that over and over again from the older Koreans. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and they bow. The little ones don't know anything about it, because that's too many years ago. So just going back and seeing the South Korean government being reconstructed that way, and the people being prosperous, made me feel that, yes, it was worthwhile, that what I did and so many hundreds of thousands did was worthwhile to, I think, save the Korean government. And even today, where it is, it's very, very rewarding. North Korea is in bad shape. What we heard about the North Koreans were, because I did talk to a couple of officers who had talked to some defectors, and they said they have no radio, no telephone, they can't correspond with anybody outside of North Korea. They don't know what's going on in South Korea. They don't realize what's going on in their own country. When I looked across at North Korea, there was all these buildings, but through binoculars, they were fake. It was just a facade. And they played loudspeakers all day long, music. So what they told us, the intelligent people, was they played this music all day long, and at night they turn the lights, and until 10 o'clock they turn them off. But there's nothing there. They're trying to show the South Koreans that they're very prosperous, you know. So, you know, that kind of play was something very interesting to me to find out what happened to each side of the two countries. And hopefully, you know, that there will be someday reunification. And they do. The South Korean government built a roadway right to the Korean border, a major highway, and the North Koreans never finished it. And there's been constant talk about reunification back and forth, and hasn't happened yet. But there are some cracks. They are letting some people visit relatives in North Korea under their control in a village that's set up specifically for that. And there were some Korean units in, not this Olympics, but the last couple of Olympics. And then when I was there, they were hosting the World Cup soccer, South Korea and Japan. And North Korea was participating. There was a lot of cooperation there. So maybe someday they will. There is it's like the Marine Corps Memorial in Washington, the raising the flag at Iwo Jima. They have a huge globe in their museum outside, and it's got a big crack in it. On top of the crack, there's two soldiers hugging each other. One was a North Korean, one was a South Korean. Brothers fought brothers. And it's a very symbolic monument to the people there, you know. So I went to a land I never heard of, and people I never met, as we say in Korea, forgotten war. And I enjoyed my experience because that's what I wanted to do. And I became a teacher and then an administrator. I was an administrator for 30 years. And what I learned in my training, being a platoon leader and an officer and so forth, is good organizational skills, good management skills, good people skills, and that really helped me in my civilian life. So I stayed with Reserve Program. I joined the 77th Division out of New York, Statute Limited Division. And when they were disbanded, I went to a civil affairs unit in the Bronx, and I spent 31 years altogether between my active and my reserve time, and I retired as a full colonel in the reserves.
Now, what year did you retire?
1981. You get 31 years of commissioned service, you know, 30 years, and I got 31. But my unit in New York City, the Civil Affairs Unit, has been recalled now 7 times since we started with Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia, because civil affairs, you really deal with the populace after a battle, you know, reconstruct the schools, reconstruct the hospital, reconstruct the banking system, and that's what we were doing. I was an education officer, you would be a legal consultant, you'd be a financial consultant. So they get called up quite a bit, and my unit's been over there many, many times. In 1990, I guess it was, yeah, 90, a good friend of mine who I served with became a 2-star general in Washington, and became Chief of the Army Reserve, Officer Chief of the Army Reserve, OCAR, Major General William Ward. And we got very friendly, and I said to Bill, I called him up in Pentagon, I said, Bill, recall me, because I had a general slot for recall. He said, how old are you? I said, I just turned 60. He said, nope. He said, call me the day before, I would have taken you. So I never got back in again. So most of my time was spent in reserve, but a good experience in reserve, because we worked with major headquarters, being it was civil affairs. I worked with FORSCOM, I worked with TRADOC, and I worked with REDCOM. And that was a great experience and a great learning experience to what the whole military is all about. Because in TRADOC, which is down at Fort Monroe, it's called the Training and Doctrine Command. And these are all 4-star general slots. And their job was to predict the training and the doctrine for the next 10 years. And they put it all through computers, and they went through everything, threat branch, which they check the threat throughout the world every day. And they developed a training program to fight a war 10 years down the line. Then you go to FORSCOM, which I went to, and that's the Forces Command, which now takes the forces to structure the training to fight that war. Then you go to REDCOM, and they're the Readiness Command. They take the forces, they take the training, they put it in the field, and that's when they go to Fort Irwin out in California, and they put it into live action. So I said, you know, the military's not that dumb. I mean, everybody says, you know, military intelligence, ha ha ha, and oxymoron. And I said, nah, they're pretty smart. They know what they're doing. We make a lot of mistakes, obviously, but I had a lot of faith in the military after being in the reserves that many years, you know. So I spent my years as an educator and ended up in Rockland County I was a principal of a middle school and a high school, and I went to Connecticut, and I was principal of high school and a superintendent, and then I retired. So I had two careers. I retired in the military and I retired in education, and very happy I did.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
I'm American Legion. I am a life member.
Okay.
Korean Wars, I'm a life member. Which used to be called the Retired Officers Association, I'm a life member. It's now called MOAA, and VFW I belong to. But
Okay.
I was very active. I was the commander of the American Legion in Litchfield for about 5 years. And also I was an officer in the Korean War Veterans Association. But now, I'm off now, right?
No, well,
I think if these organizations have done, the one printout you have on paper was done by the American Legion. They took that Chapter 13, they reproduced it, and they sent that out, you know.
okay, all right.
Okay, thank you.
You know, a lot of the questions